our own worth and defend our own voice, which lets the true market emerge. The strength of the design lies in each of our participation, since we are the node to channel our energy end to end. As we claim responsibility to uphold our own rights, we radiate the power that brings our truth into light.
Hey everyone, welcome to Bitcoin Homeschoolers. We thank Tip NZ, who shared her music for our intro and extra for today's show. Education through music is just a wonderful thing, so you have to check her out. Tip is at tipnz.com. Now, in today's episode, we explore the convergence of technology, education, and health. It is just alarming how distractions like our phone notifications, blue light, and social media algorithms just wreak havoc with our circadian rhythms and other aspects of our health. And this dysfunctional relationship with technology is what motivated Anjan to develop the daylight computer, true low time preference technology. So Tali and I just learned so much in this discussion. I think you will too. So without further ado, here is our discussion with the thoughtful Anjan.
Awesome. So we'll just start. We're already recording on both sides. And I would just love, first of all, welcome to our show. So excited to have you here, the founder of a very exciting and useful resource that we'll let you go into details about. So take it over and tell people who you are.
Sweet. Well, thanks for having me on. And it's exciting because it's rare to find the multiple different threads converge. Whether it be me or the project, I feel like with a certain person, we're talking about the decentralized and sovereign aspects of what I'm interested in and what daylight is. With somebody else, we're getting into the blue light and circadian rhythms. With somebody else, it's about, the social media algorithms and addiction and distraction. And it just feels really cool to meet somebody else where all of it is intersecting, all of it is on the table. And that's probably the best way to describe me. I've been very passionate about technology and gadgets and computers ever since I was a kid. Would always go to the store and try every single new laptop and phone and camcorder and boombox and everything in between, and just kind of fell in love with it. The early images of Steve Jobs and Nolan Bushnell were these early Silicon Valley founders. Nolan Bushnell was the founder of Atari, which was kind of like the first irreverent technology company. They were like total punks and rebels and hippies. And I just fell in love with that because I come from a family of doctors and they're somewhat kind of by the book and conventional, and I felt always a little bit more of a free spirit. And so I was like looking for some hero or something to identify with, and I'm like, oh my God, these people, they're like changing the world and creating new things and literally shaping the reality that we live in, and they're doing it their own way. They're not conforming, and they're not being lame. They're being awesome and creative. And so that kind of like left a deep impression on me. And much of the journey since has been like this absolute love and passion for technology and invention, meeting what often was a very dysfunctional relationship with technology. I'm pretty ADHD. And so most of what using a computer has meant for me is distraction and being addicted, and 200 tabs becoming 400 tabs, becoming 800 tabs, and the thing I'm supposed to do getting procrastinated, and just feeling like really crappy about myself and my self-esteem and willpower. And somewhere along the lines, I just, was like, okay, I'm not going to be successful. Because whether I want to be a manager at Chick-fil-A or, be a field anthropologist, so much of my life's expression and work and productivity is through a computer. And the computer is the bane of my existence. It's what makes me feel terrible, physically, mentally, emotionally. So I think my own journey of kind of reckoning with my relationship with technology kind of is what's informed my interest to kind of try to reform computers and technology to be something that's a little more humane, a little healthier, and maybe works for some of us that are a little bit on the tails of the distribution. We're neurodivergent. We're interested on the frontier of things. And so that's kind of me.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. I know we have 4 kids, and our youngest and I used to fight all the time, and they would get so heated. And I used to say to him, please don't let technology come between you and me. I don't like what it's doing to our relationship. Because it was like that tug of war you were talking about. It's addictive. He doesn't want to do it, but it is where he's getting his stimulation from. It is such a tug of war for kids, you know, that fall, as you said, towards the tail end of either side of the spectrum. So yeah, I think so many people can relate to that. You want to add something?
Well, I'm just trying to think. So our audience that we're shooting to help are people who are parents, young kids, or want to be parents. And we do try to reach homeschoolers to tell them about Bitcoin, but honestly, most of our audience is Bitcoiners who want to homeschool. And so what I'm having a little bit of trouble processing is how do we just take that amount of information? You got blue light, just the technology, and then you have the addiction piece.
I want to dive deep with addiction.
And then you've got
side.
Well, I don't know if okay. Well, I'm just saying there's multiple layers. There's multiple layers in there that I think would be helpful to our audience. And I'm just trying to figure out how do we just kind of take it out, because otherwise we'll be here all day. So I'm just trying to think, how do we break this up so it's useful for people and it's good. So
well,
and I think there's a thread that connects all of it.
yes, definitely.
It's been fascinating because each of it was informed by different life experiences. But when I started to like kind of crack away at the problem, I was like, oh my God, it's all the same thing. And what the core of it is essentially a respect for that which is Lindy, a respect for that which is empirical, that's tested, that has a proof of work, that is natural, versus that which is this like human kind of trying to be too clever by half. And so if you think about what a modern computer is, it's all this cleverness that is kind of redoubled on itself, right? It's, hey, can replace 20 different devices. This can be replaced for entertainment and education and that. And so much of the addiction and distraction comes from like, you've put crack cocaine in the same place you're trying to eat spinach. It's like they were trying to create something that is magical. Like, oh, you can do everything in one place. In real life, your kitchen, the place where you have your TV, the place where you do your work, like you have different places in your environment. In the real world, you know, you would go hunt and then you would come back and be around your campfire and then you'd have your bedroom or whatever it may be. There's all these interesting ways in which our psychology is shaped for a particular world we evolved under. And so much of the ways that technology undermines us is it's mismatched to the way we're evolved. It's mismatched to what is natural or nature for us. And so even the circadian rhythm impact and blue light and so on, that's unnatural. You don't get blue light at nighttime. And all the problems that kind of come from that come from there. The red dots, the notification pings and pongs, those are unnatural. Of course, we're going to have an orienting response because in nature, if something goes bing or this, you want to pay attention. If something is red, you want to pay attention. And so kind of across the board, the way I've kind of gotten like self-clarity around this project is, oh, how do we come back to natural principles? How do we come back to things that are invariant? How do we come back to things that are beyond human cleverness? And so that's where like things like Bitcoin, sovereignty, really are a similar thing. How do you come back to something that is beyond, you know, humans trying to be too clever by half?
Right. I mean, for us, we want education to go back to the way the most decentralized education you can have is the parents or the family, and the separation of education and state. I mean, it's a similar type thing where if you're a Bitcoiner, all those concepts make sense. They apply to that world as well. So here's one question for you. Maybe it's a two-part question. So my point of view is, and I really don't think I've ever had anybody really push back on this, that you have to set an example for your kids. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first, so to speak. And if the kids see you checking your phone at night and doing all those things, it'd be a little challenging to say, hey, I'm going to force you to look at this device or use this other device. So maybe, because at this point still we haven't even really told everybody
what it is
your product, right? I just realized that too. We're well into this thing. So let's take a step back. Why don't you do the 30-second elevator speech, what it is that your passion led to, and then we can get back to the question I was just trying to that I was just trying to set up for you.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of the quest I've been on, and it's actually been 6 years from first idea to now getting the first product out into the world and launched. So it was a really tough journey to reinvent it. The kind of quest is, how do you reinvent computers to be like healthier, distraction free, and sovereign? How do you redeem computing from being this kind of brave new world tool of mass like numbing and stimulation and addiction and control into something that allows you to be sovereign, that allows you to learn, that allows you to be the highest faculties of what a human is possible for, or our prefrontal cortex and not our lizard brain? And how do you do it in a way where it's not misaligned with your values, it's not misaligned with your choices? And that to me is what sovereignty is you get to instantiate your values and your choices get to be respected. And so where I wanted to start with was the actual physical hardware, the actual physical substrate of a computer. How do I make this healthier? And so to me, I got really into light and how much light implicates health and circadian rhythms and mood. And so the blue light of a computer, I started to realize how bad that is, and how it actually feeds a lot of these cycles of overstimulation, distraction, addiction. And we could get into that. And so the core of daylight was inventing a new computer display that kind of resembles paper, that doesn't produce its own light, but reflects the light of your environment. You can't see a paper book in a dark room because it's not producing its own light. A normal computer screen is like a flashlight. A piece of paper is like an analog object. And so we were able to make a computer screen that's like an analog object, but where the black ink can animate and move around, kind of like Marauder's map in Harry Potter or Tom Riddle's diary. The page is the same and the ink disappears. That's essentially what we've created. And the main reason to do so is it's blue light free, it's flicker free, you could use it outdoors, and it's just a lot calmer on your nervous system as well. And then what we're doing is we built a tablet with that display technology. So it's kind of like, you can think about it as like a healthy iPad that is great for doing better for you stuff on it, instead of, addicting stuff at social media and games and things like that. Instead, you can read and write and sketch and listen to audiobooks and play educational games and whatever you'd want to do that a computer can actually be quite useful for.
Yep.
And then the software wise is we're trying to create a decentralized, distraction-free, minimalist OS. And so that's where it's like, I don't know if we've sent it to you, but yeah, we have a whole proposal where you would, instead of Apple Pay, Daylight Pay would actually have Lightning or eCash, so Bitcoin rails underneath it. Your Daylight ID, instead of being like Apple or iCloud, it would actually be Nostr or something like that.
Yep.
And so suddenly we don't need to convince people or sell them on it or have them have a clunky onboarding experience. You kind of come for this healthier computer, but over time we're able to create a total new stack that is sovereign and decentralized, and all the rails, payment, identity, storage, key management, and so on, is all done in a way. And so that's kind of what we're excited about, is like sovereignty at every layer. So like physical health sovereignty, nervous system sovereignty, like cognitive sovereignty. We think of distraction as impingement on your cognitive sovereignty, the notifications, the addiction, and then actual monetary and digital sovereignty. So hopefully it could be like a decentralized Apple where we create a whole new ecosystem of computers. And frankly, I just don't think we can forever build the kind of world we want on top of Apple or Google forever. So whether it's us or somebody else, I'm pretty convinced this needs to exist.
I'd love to have a competitor to replace Apple and Google.
Well, can we talk specifically for a moment about how this impacts children? I'm currently reading this book called The Anxious Generation. Yes, and that guy, the author, Jonathan Haidt, I believe, he also wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, and so much of it has to do with the identification of microaggression, and you just invent a million ways to make yourself unhappy versus looking for a million ways to make yourself happy. So let's talk a little bit about how social media, or just computers in general, access to the internet, affects kids and their image of self, and the psychological consequences of that. Can you comment on that in your design process?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll take a step back just to give a bit of context. Most of what Apple has done has been, and Steve Jobs has been implementing the vision of Xerox PARC and a guy named Alan Kay. They were kind of these early pioneers who had basically dreamt up the modern computer. Because before then, computers were calculators, right? Like they were not, we think of them as so much more now, but back then it was more in the realm of like a toaster. It was a particular appliance you used for a particular task. And so his original intuition for what a computer was is it's having the Library of Alexandria on your desk right now. It's in your pocket. It's having something that the inner poet in you has so much of a better way to express itself because it's able to help you in particular ways. If your word blocked, it's got tools to do it. It's an interactive, animated, dynamic thing that can be personalized and contextualized to you. Every media in the past has been static, right? Like you can read the book, but you can't talk back to it. The whole point of computers is for the first time, we can actually have it go in both ways. You can interact with it, you can animate it. And so actually one of the original papers he wrote, which is one of the first kind of like examples of what a personal computer could be instead of these big machines, is he has two kids holding these little tabs. He invented the idea of the tablet sitting in the grass, like learning. And for him, that is what the vision of computing was, is to make education and learning fun and interesting. Like, the dopamine system that we have is set up to reward learning in the natural environment. And he's like, we could harness that with a computer because it can be interactive and engaging rather than, something that's kind of boring and static. It can only allow us to better cultivate our own agency, our own inner curiosity. And so Alan Kay says, he's like, somewhere along the line, that original vision of computing to be this great empowerment for children, for the imagination, for creativity, for learning, was lost with a far easier task of just creating tools for entertainment and communication and business people. And he's like, that's what happened, because it was more convenient for Steve Jobs to cater to those markets than the original intention of basically amplifying the innate capacities of us all, and particularly kids. And so I think that's where so many of these problems come from, is there's nobody who sat down and said, this is what I care about. Instead, they were optimizing for, well, you're going to buy this new one because it's got more colors. It's more shiny. Look at the specs. It's faster, right? They're like always trying to sell you on specs. And so kind of like peacocking, it's just been a rat race to more colors, more shininess, more saturation, more stimulation. My candy is going to be more addicting than your candy. And it's just felt like nobody's really sat down and said enough is enough. Like, this is not being optimized with our actual goals or intentions in mind. And guess what? They had some good ideas back then in the beginning. Let's come back to that. And so I think it's as much the education and the intentions we have and things like podcasts. And it's funny, these same social media things allowing us to connect and organize and, self-educate ourselves is making it possible for us to try to create alternatives. And so I think the combination of that and Moore's law, which is the pace of progress of how much computers improve, they get, doubly as fast every 2 years, which has continued for a long time. That's finally gotten to the point where you don't really notice the difference between the new computer upgrade. You don't, like, between the last iPhone and the new iPhone, the new MacBook, like, do you even notice anymore? And what that means is you're not stuck in a rat race of trying to spend billions of dollars to make the state-of-the-art computers. Otherwise, you can't compete. And I believe that's only kind of happened in the last couple years. You could argue even just last year and now. And so it makes it possible finally for upstarts to make computers that are good enough. You don't need to spend billions of dollars to have the latest chips and fancy things, but we can reimagine it with a total different value set. And for me, the most important values are health, which I consider to be physical sovereignty, cognitive sovereignty, and then actual, kind of monetary, digital identity, so on, sovereignty. And so the hope here is if you can reimagine a computer where you just carve out the good parts of it, learning, reading, writing, sketching, so on, you then can remove all the things about a computer that are kind of dangerous and addicting And then you don't need to be like, here's 30 minutes of screen time to your kid, right? Like it doesn't need to be this thing that it's like going to Central Park where there's lots of drug dealers. Like that's what a normal computer feels like. Like it's a beautiful park, but you're like cautious the whole time, like watch out. The goal here almost is to create a new park that's free of drug dealers that actually in itself can play to the innate curiosities and agency of kids, and they'll, read books and, be able to learn things and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the goal here, is to create computers that aren't addicting or distracting. And in that way, kind of hopefully have kids redeem this medium.
Can you, with daylight, can you, I would think one of the challenges of adoption for it is going to be, I'm going to have something I need to do, whatever it is. I have a certain program on my laptop, or there's a certain app, there's a whatever it is. And if I can't use whatever I think is critical to my job or studies or whatever it is, if I can't use that on there, then to me it's like, okay, here's a roadblock to get me to use it. With the kids, I think it's easier because parents have a little bit more control over, hey, yeah, this is how you're going to, if you want to do email, here it is, and you give them a safer, healthy tablet as opposed to one that, a traditional one. So I still come back to, you still have to, if you're going to get, the adults are going to have to get on board with it in order, I think, for them to then push on their kids or introduce it to their kids. I say push. I think you could try to do it just saying, here, this is only for your kids, but I'm assuming you're marketing to both, right? You're marketing to adults and kids. You don't care who it is. The things you're talking about from a health perspective apply to everybody, right? So how would use me as an example. If I had a tablet, if I had a healthy tablet, how does my life change if I have that versus what I'm doing today? I don't know. I'm just trying to walk through an example to make it more tangible.
Sure. Yeah,
for someone who's listening to this, saying, okay, what do I do with this information? If I got this thing, what do I do with it? What changes? Do I have this period where I'm using both, or do I go cold turkey? Have you gone cold turkey? Do you have another?
I've not gone cold turkey.
Right. So if you can't do it, like you're the visionary, man. I'm like, so help me understand what I could do with it. Like I want to, as a non-techie dad, what can I do?
The goal is not to go cold turkey. It's not realistic, and the point isn't to demonize the existing things. It's to give yourself some sanctuary, to give you some option that hopefully over time is more and more of your digital life. And so even now we're just a tablet, but over time we want to create a laptop, a phone, a monitor. So more and more of your life hopefully can be handled through something like this. But actually the product it's pretty cool how the same kind of substrate of like, I want to create a more natural, healthy computer ends up being like very powerful for adults as well, and not just kids. For kids, obviously the use case here is it's great for kind of text and reading and writing and learning. And it's not addicting and overstimulating and distracting, and doesn't have blue light, and it's not getting you jacked up. But for adults, what it essentially is it's soccer cleats. Your iPad is tennis shoes. It's kind of a lowest common denominator tool. And what the Daylight is it's soccer cleats. It's an iPad that is opinionated such that it's amazing for text-based things, for reading, for writing, and so on. And so because of the paper-like screen, you get tremendously less eye strain than if you're on an iPad. So like a lot of the early customers of our thing are not just parents buying this for their kids, but they're buying it for themselves because they're an engineer, they're a scientist, they're a business person, they're a hedge fund manager, they're whoever has to kind of like read lots of documents and PDFs and articles and essays, take notes in meetings and so on. They're buying it for that because they're like, I don't want Slack and email and all these distractions, and hey, the blue light, the science is getting pretty clear about how bad that is for our circadian rhythms. Instead of checking my email at nighttime on an iPad, I use a Daylight instead, and I'm able to sleep a lot better and not take as much time. And so for parents, you can kind of think about it as two things. One is it's a performance device. It's the best possible tool for reading and writing, particularly like PDFs and links and things like that. And it's a healthier computer. You can use it at nighttime and not have blue light. and not be so kind of overstimulated. And for kids, it's the kind of the physical health side, and then the distraction and addiction side.
Did we talk before? I think when we talked before this podcast, I think we mentioned homeschooling conferences to you. Did we? Am I remembering that correctly?
I remember one of them, but I don't know if you.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking, it would be good if you could bring it to a school, because in a school, basically, whatever, depending on the school jurisdiction, how they make their decisions and what their kids are going to be using or teachers are using, that's more of a top-down type approach as opposed to the decentralized. So I think from a value orientation, the homeschoolers are more aligned with you. And I'm just thinking, if you were at a homeschooling convention, it's similar to the Bitcoin conventions or anything else. You're going to have, everybody has their booths, and there's going to be talks, and then people are networking. It's just focused on education. I think the message of a healthier alternative would resonate with that particular group of people.
I would agree with that. So the homeschoolers kind of fall into two subcategories, very, very generally speaking. You have the ones that are just rejecting modern technology and will not let their kids touch a phone. They don't have computer time. They're making their own clothes, like, Little House on the Prairie kind of thing. They are just trying to stay as pure as possible. And then you have the other homeschoolers, and they recognize that in order for their kids to grow up and be competitive in society, they must engage in technology. So then that's the group that's really going to struggle with that tug of war. And it always seems to come down to, I will give you, it's like a barter system. If you do this, you get 30 minutes on an iPad or something, which I really hated doing with my kids, because even those 30 minutes when I give it to them, I'm literally feeding them poison. It's like, I'll let you have ice cream if you eat the spinach, but then you're also having the ice cream. And is that really better than just eating the ice cream if you have some spinach in there mixed up? You know what I'm saying? So I love that this resource is now available. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I disagree with you a little bit. That category is not completely true, because you have the parents that are more Jeff Booth-like. They don't know Jeff Booth, but they're Jeff Booth-like. They're trying to use a tool that can enhance education. You said it earlier, right? In the world, you can get any information, any language, any time now because of the internet. And now you can do it while you're sitting on the lawn or in the car. So the quality of education should be improving, and the cost should be coming down, right? Technology should be helping. There are parents that are looking at these pads and Khan Academy and anything else that you can do online, and they're saying these are things we can do to enhance our kids' education. There are others that are saying, that might just say, I'm really tired right now, and I just want my kids to leave me alone for a little while, so I'm going to give them some, like a cartoon, I'm going to give them a phone, I'm going to use this technology more as an escape, because I just need to lay down for a few minutes, so the kids put on a movie or take out a laptop. So I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think applying this kind of technology is a way of improving education, but it's also improving their health while they're doing it.
I absolutely agree with that. I don't think we disagree with that at all. I just know that so I'm thinking back in our own personal experience, our kids didn't have access to a phone until they were old enough to be in different club and activities, and they were in leadership roles, and everybody was communicating through my one phone. And when they say Limburg, I can never tell who they're actually talking to. So I finally just said, just everybody get your own phone so you can coordinate, right? The problem with that is the moment you hand them the phone, they now have access to what you said before, a carnival of choices that are not always good for them. It's at their fingertips, and you have the parental controls, but that raises another issue of distrust, and that distrust starts to build between you and the kids, which I also did not enjoy. I don't agree with that. I mean, I know we have to control them, but it would be so much easier if I could have handed them one of your tablets and go crazy and know that it's going to be okay.
So what are you going to give the kids a Nostr account? Like they have their own privacy and they can go look at their own stuff? Like how do you...
I think it's realizing that a lot of these things are back-end rails, right? So you don't even need to know about it, you don't need to think about it. But now these companies can't have the same rent-seeking ability. So there's going to be potentially new front ends, there's going to be new services and things like that that you'll be a part of. But hey, if they ever do something that you're misaligned with, you're not stuck with them in the same way. And so that's where I feel like that's what happens in the natural world, right? Like there are top predators, there are keystone species, but they're not a gatekeeper or can collect rent on every single thing in the environment, right? It's more rhizomatic.
Yeah.
And so the goal would be for software and the internet and digital technologies to match that way. And I agree, like we have to be realistic. Like it's kind of interesting, like some of the early customers who have daylights are parents. So one of the examples I thought was really cool was previously, their kid was only allowed to get 30 minutes of screen time on Friday, another 30 minutes over the weekend. They got like a restricted amount of screen time and no gadgets allowed in their bedroom. But now with the daylight, they're allowed to kind of have unlimited screen time on their daylight but what are they doing on their daylight? And they're allowed to bring it into the bedroom. It's he's on Kindle and he's reading, or he's listening to audiobooks in Audible that the parents have loaded up, or he's playing chess on it because it's actually like really good for playing chess.
Yeah.
And he's also what's it called? Brilliant. It's like an educational game thing called Brilliant. It teaches you like rudimentary math and science and things like that. And the idea is, as a parent, you're like kind of okay if they have unlimited screen time on those type of things.
Yes. Yeah.
My point is the physiological effects of screen time are often underestimated. Like the blue light overactivates and stimulates your dopamine system. So then when you're not on the device, your brain is confused because its baseline has been shifted.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of the ADD-esque symptoms are coming from, is our attentional and dopamine systems are being rewired by these. And so that's kind of the goal, is to level the playing field. So there's a second kind of parental use case, kind of similar to what you're saying, where they're like, okay, sometimes I just need to like have the kid watch Cocomelon or Peppa the Pig. But it's now like not heroin. It's like candy. Right? And like candy's not necessarily like good for you, but it's also not heroin. And so that the way one parent described it is, what I like about the daylight is it's more interesting than throwing a tantrum or picking your nose, but less interesting than the backyard. And so there's a way like you'll never go to the backyard if you got Peppa the Pig in front of you.
Yes.
On the daylight, you might be satisfied by Peppa the Pig and you might also get bored. And I think that is really interesting because we've leveled the playing field.
Yeah. Can you, I'm a little distracted too. Do you have resources that impacted you that you would recommend to parents that want to understand just how bad that negative impact you described of getting, so the kids are exposed to the blue light as an example, and it messes up their sleep, or it messes up their circadian rhythm, or it messes up whatever it is, which has secondary and tertiary effects, right?
There's another part of it called flicker, by the way.
The flicker. So perfect. So I personally want to learn more. Do you have one or two resources that you would recommend? Because I'm just imagining, again, I'm thinking of someone listening to this, they're a parent or going to be a parent, and they hear this stuff. And it's one thing for someone to get on a podcast and say, blue light bad, and flickering bad, and whatever. But if there was a way to say, here's a resource, it's a documentary, it's a book, it's a podcast, can you give one or two recommendations that might be helpful?
Yeah, I would. One guy who I think was extremely influential for me was John Ott, who was kind of an early pioneer in revealing that medicine did not quite appreciate how absolutely central to health light is. To mood, to cognition, to metabolism. And so if you look up his book, Health and Light, it's kind of stunning. It was written a long time ago, but still it feels very prescient. And so he's got a cool video also you can find on YouTube where they have a classroom with flickering fluorescent lights, and it's kind of a time lapse. And the kids are rambunctious, and they're kind of like not really paying attention, and they're not focused and fidgeting and all of that. And then they have the same classroom, but the lights are replaced with non-flickering incandescent bulbs. And suddenly there's like 60 to 70% less like fidgeting and rambunctiousness and not paying attention and so on.
Wow.
So his point is we've gotten so used to these environments that are unnatural, we don't realize what it's doing to our nervous system and what it's doing to our kind of attentional pathways.
Yeah.
So
wow. Do phones have the same? Do phones have the same flicker type of issue?
yeah, so that's the problem with modern phones and laptops and iPads and tablets is not only do they have blue light, they have flicker. And so what flicker is, how nerdy do you want me to get?
That's up to you. I'm just
nerdy.
I would say go a little nerdy, yeah, because
Yeah, go nerdy.
I want people who hear this to say that really piques my interest. I think this is something that can help my family, because if they don't have that, then it's just okay, it's interesting. This guy's on his 6-year quest to stop flickering. You know, like it doesn't have the same impact as this helps my health of my family. My kid is going to be able to focus better, better education, better life.
Okay.
That's compelling to me. So get nerdy.
Yeah, I'll get into it. And this might sound like a hyperbole, but I don't think it's that far away. I think like 5 or 10 years from now, we'll look back and be like, oh, our like relationship with technology and the way computers were set up, it was like smoking and secondhand smoking. Like we didn't realize actually how bad it was and how many externalities there are until we did it for a while, right? And it's the same thing with like lead in gasoline. It's like we look back and we're like, holy crap, why were we doing that? I think it'll be a similar thing here with the blue light, the flicker, the distraction, the addiction, the notifications, and so on. So we're kind of on the precipice of it now, where the academic literature around circadian rhythms, around these things, are starting to really come through. And people like Jonathan Haidt, publishing The Anxious Generation and things like that, pulling the science and studies together. And it's still really early. I think it's super compelling. So flicker, what flicker is, and it's something modern. You don't get this with incandescent bulbs and lighting of the past. That's what's super interesting about this. This is kind of like a new societal experiment that we're kind of running since 2010 onwards. So it's like, we really don't know. We haven't really run this before. Essentially what happens in modern lighting, like the LEDs in your iPhone and iPad and so on, is the way they change brightness is not like the way LEDs change brightness in your high school physics class. The way they change brightness, when you put the brightness less and you put the brightness more, the way they change brightness is they change in 1 second what percentage of the time it's on versus off.
Okay.
And so if you want to be 100% bright as an LED, you're on for the entire time. And if you want to be 0% brightness, you're off for the entire time. But if you wanted to be 50% brightness, if I was on for half a second and off for half a second, you would see that, right? It would like visibly look like it turned on and turned off. And so they were like, okay, we can't do this. So they like realized, there's actually an optical illusion where if I'm on for 5 milliseconds and off for 5 milliseconds and on for 5 milliseconds and off for 5 milliseconds and on, you don't notice it as click, 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 click. You just notice it as a darker white. But if I'm on for 7 seconds and off for 3 and on for 7 and off for 3, it just looks like a brighter white. And and so this playing around with the proportion of on and off, but doing it in these really, really, really small time slices, is actually how they change brightness now on these things. And it's based on kind of old perceptual science that like, under this threshold, humans can't detect it. Right? And they didn't really have great ways of testing that. They'll put people in front of it and they're like, does this give you a headache? How do you feel? Do you notice this? And they're like, great. But no one sat there and did it for 6 months or a year or multiple years. Or, back then they spent an hour on a computer, not the 10 hours we spend now. So this is a total like untested societal experiment. And the basic theory is actually they didn't understand that even in the moment you cannot consciously perceive it. there is a subconscious perceptual load from this.
I just had a
And
flash.
so-
Yeah, I
That's
remember.
amazing.
I remember there was a thing. I don't know if it was in the marketing class or what it was, where when movies first came out, and they were actual film, right?
Oh, subliminal message.
They would put a subliminal message in there with Coke or popcorn, and people would suddenly get thirsty and go buy more stuff, and they couldn't perceive it because it was maybe one frame out of I don't know what the numbers are. If it was 10 or 20, whatever the number of like frames would be, they would flick it in there. So I couldn't see it, and I hadn't thought about that for years.
So what is the damage that these constant flickering
Well, that's a great question.
causing to your cognitive energy efficiency functioning?
Right. I think it can be understood in terms like three kind of effects, depending on where you are in the curve. So on the extreme end of the curve, if you have a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, and actually even sometimes PTSD, a common thing, it's called post-concussion syndrome, is screens are really, really painful for you. You get nausea, you get headaches, you get eye strain. It's like really, really uncomfortable. And the best theory is your brain doesn't have much of a buffer now in that post-concussed state. And so that little bit of load from the flicker actually really affects you. And so that's one of the theories where the light and the flickering of the light, the emissive light, why it's so painful. Screens are like one of the things they really indicate you stay away from after you get concussed. And so that's a really good evidence that like we basically all have this buffer, and when we don't have that buffer, it actually affects us. It's like when you're sleep deprived, it's easier to get sick. It's a similar thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's like pretty strong evidence. We're all kind of dealing with it subacutely, and when you get concussed, it becomes acute. So that's kind of one effect.
Well, just to continue on that, so did the John Ott Health and Light cover flickering, or is that too early?
They covered in the context of fluorescent bulbs and things like that.
That was
But
where
LEDs and kind of flickering LEDs and this super high frame rate flickering, it was
So-
more modern.
But he was gonna tell us the other effects.
Okay, I was trying to get clear on the effects. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back around. So the other effect is essentially what some people feel very acutely, but actually the vast majority of us feel it at some subacute level. And so I guess I'll give the evidence second and give you the frame first. The frame here is like, do you know when you like kind of have to start really going to the bathroom? You really have to go pee. You start like tapping your leg and you start being a little more distractible and you interrupt. It's because there's some underlying discomfort that you're then having to kind of like distract yourself from or stimulate from or something. That's essentially what's happening with flicker, where there's like some underlying discomfort that shows up as a parasympathetic response. Your nervous system essentially is getting a little jacked. And so the theory is that's what's driving some of the distractibility. Is the same way you're kind of like, trying to stim or be distracted when you have to go pee.
Yeah.
You're getting a similar thing where there's almost like an anxiety discomfort that comes from it that we're then trying to stim away from. And the evidence for that is there's a phenomenon called screen apnea. Like sleep apnea is when you're sleeping and you don't breathe. So they called it screen apnea, where what happens in these studies is when you're on an emissive screen, your MacBook or iPad, which is emitting light, bright and flickering, your breathing rate your tidal volume gets shallower. Your breathing rate goes down. And so there is another layer of physiological anxiety from not having the same breathing patterns. They're literally more constricted. And so it's kind of this crazy vicious cycle where you are so much more stuck to the dopamine slot machine because you're physiologically at nervous system level compromised. You're a little more, on edge. And so of course it's like binge eating. When you're stressed, you binge eat. They're kind of doing a similar thing here, and then you keep hitting Facebook, you keep hitting TikTok, you keep hitting your email. And so it's fascinating how the software and the hardware are working together in this kind of vicious cycle. And so there's a way in which what we're trying to do actually really targets the attention economy at its core. Because when there isn't the same stimming, when there isn't the same need to binge because you're anxious, what happens? What happens to their business model based around having you spend as much time as possible, having you addicted? It's like Ozempic and junk food companies. What happens when people aren't addicted or have cravings?
Well, there's also compound effects, right? If you're chronically stressed, you're chronically sleep deprived, there are a whole host of other health issues, and you'll never be able to perform your best at work, or in this case, if we're talking about education with the school, kids learning. And so I'm just thinking, multiplying what you're talking about time throughout a child's development, it's more than just an hour of flickering. It's now they're in that different state. It's going to be multiple hours after that, or days, or whatever the recovery is. They're going to have more of it in between then. And I'm guessing now you're in this chronic feedback loop that you're talking about, and now your ability to absorb material and learn new concepts, problem solve, be creative, fill in the blank, now that's compromised. So I just imagine the longer you've been inundated with that, the harder the recovery would have to be. So if you're a parent,
the detox process has to be, you have to go through withdrawal symptoms. And how long does it take, right?
Exactly.
Right, yeah. So if you're a parent and you hear that, you're like, okay, the kid's going to be with us till they're 18. How do we help them get healthy and be able to function and learn things for themselves and do all this stuff? And if we've set them in a stage that's chronically, whatever you call it, anxious, or I forget what the word was that you used there, but
parasympathetic.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, though. We talked about this before. We can't go cold turkey because this pad is still not able to do a lot of things that computers can do. So, for example, we have 2 kids in college, and they are, by necessity, on the screen hours and hours and hours and hours every day. When they go to the library, it's fluorescent light. When they go to the cafeteria, it's fluorescent light. When they go to the student union, fluorescent light. What's available on your pad that can substitute what they're doing on their laptop?
I mean, that's what's kind of cool about it, to kind of answer your question too, where you brought up like, hey, I have to use certain apps. Will I be able to do it on this? We have 2 modes. We kind of have a lockdown focus mode, which is mainly for kids, and it kind of curates like this reading, writing, audiobooks, and that. And then we kind of have an open mode, which is maybe more geared for adults. And there, you get access to actually almost all of the apps that you need, because we have access to Android apps and web apps. So if you're in school and you're using Canvas, we have that. If you're using Microsoft Word, if you're using Excel, if you're using Outlook, if you're using Google Docs, actually all of those things run on our thing. So in that sense, we're kind of a one-to-one replacement for an iPad. If you put a keyboard with ours, we can be a reasonable replacement for a laptop as well.
But everything you have is black and white. Is that correct?
That's the big difference. Yes, to get the kind of health benefits and so on, it is black and white. So that turns out for most people to be okay. There's some use cases where that's
because one of our kids is a design major, and she needs to be able to see color. So necessarily she's on her Kindle because she's using Procreate. But I can see how when they're writing papers, they can substitute your tablet for the laptop they're using.
Can I go onto your tablet and watch a YouTube video, but it's in black and white?
Yeah.
Okay, so because that's social media,
so on.
Wow, that's so helpful. That's amazing. Did you say you're sold out?
We are, but we're trying to get back on sale. So what we're doing right now is these pre-order deposits. So
Gotcha.
It's a $100 deposit down. You'll be first in line for when we.
When are you expecting your next shipment?
In February. So.
February. Okay, gotcha.
Okay, customer right there.
I'm on the computer 12 hours a day because all of my work is online. I'm on Zoom calls. I am working on graphics. I'm working on social media posts. I can stand up and feel my body complaining to me.
Well,
my eyes, I forget to blink. You were talking about shallow breath. I feel it more in my eyes because I blink less.
blink rates, change as well. It's like a deer in headlights. That's literally actually the parenting response that's happening.
Yeah.
So what would?
What blows my mind is this is the rest of our lives, right? Like,
yes.
If Mark Zuckerberg's right and so on, we're going to have these things stuck on our faces.
Oh,
right?
God.
It's just more screens.
Implanted in your eyeballs.
Oh, yeah. That's the Elon Musk, right? Put it in your brain. What?
We're trying to go the opposite, where it's like the least computer possible, right? We're not vilifying technology, but we're saying, hey, what matters in life is real life, relationship.
It's the low time preference technology, right? You're concerned about your health.
That's what we said on Saifuddin's podcast. Yeah.
Oh, did you really? Okay, now I really have to go listen to it. So what are we not asking you? Like, because this is new to us. Everything, you've been doing this for 6 years. I assume there's something we're missing just because we just don't even know. So I kind of want to just flip the script a little bit. Tell us something that you think that we probably don't know about or other people don't know about. Like, just I just feel like this is such a new thing. I don't feel prepared to ask you deep enough questions to really get your story out there. So what are we missing? What are we not asking you on this?
Ooh, that's fun. Two things come to mind. One is this vision from science fiction called the primer or primer. And the second thing is the possibility of architecting a new computing ecosystem and how beneficial that can be for flourishing. So the primer or primer is this book from Neil Stephenson called The Diamond Age. It was written quite some time ago. And in this, it's like a weird futuristic nanotechnology world that's also slightly Victorian. It's kind of this like old meets new. And the protagonist is this young girl named Nell, and she kind of has some really hard circumstances. Is very poor, kind of abusive stepdad, and so on. And so she doesn't really have much going for her in this world, but she gets this magical book called the Primer or Primer, which is this nanotechnology magic book. And what's cool about it is what it does is it writes chapters and stories that are appropriate for what's happening for her in life right now. Where she's getting bullied in school, and it writes a chapter about how to like defend yourself and so on, and creates pictures that like she can relate to, will include her stuffed animals as characters. So it has like context on her, it's got the previous conversations they've had, and so it's kind of this like teacher built into a book. And the basic idea is she is able to bootstrap herself out of like some really tough circumstances because she's got this amazing, ever patient, personalized teacher. And so this has been kind of one of the hidden visions in personal computing, which is Neil Stephenson calls it subversion, similar to like the Alan Kay, the point of computing is to empower people. Neil Stephenson said the point of a real good education is subversion. A kid willing to challenge an adult, a kid willing to challenge the status quo, the kid willing to follow their own instinct, their own intuition. And that actually is how you learn agency, and that's how you learn sovereignty, like your own confidence to make your own choices. And his point is, if you could, a kid, instead of going to adults every time they're blocked, going to an authority figure, always stuck on somebody else, but instead felt they could figure it out themselves, and there was something there that was that could unstuck them at times, they could really develop that capacity. And so that I found to be like a really inspiring vision. And that's one of the ways I like think about this, is how can you create like the next evolution of the book? How do you create this magic book? And now, with the advances in language models, it is possible to have something you can talk with that, if you really nail the privacy and security and it's on device and it's not on the cloud and so on, maybe it's okay to trust it with it having context on you, it knowing your interests, the previous conversations you're having with it, and suddenly it get personalized. Maybe you're dumb, maybe it's like you feel dumb if something's explained in a way that's like out of context, but it's explained in terms of skateboarding and you love skateboarding, suddenly it makes a lot of sense, right? And that's possible. And it knows what you've like learned in the past and what you don't. And so to me, like the possibility for self-learning, even in the context of homeschooling or not, potentially it can be like dramatically amplified here. And especially if we figure out how to value align this little sidekick with what values you have as a family and parents, right? because it's kind of in a way co-parenting or being a teacher on your behalf. And every parent wants to choose the teacher and the syllabus. That to me is potentially one of the like core levers to change the world, is to teach agency and self-learning and this kind of like self-reliance of sorts. And so that's my kind of like dream and hope with this, is we like work with the best educators and learning designers and different parents and different value sets and figure out how to create this. That for me would be the best kind of possible
beautiful
outcome.
vision.
Yeah, I love that vision. That's amazing.
I think that I just imagine that homeschoolers would resonate with so many of these points. I just, all right, what do you want to?
Well, I think we should end on that note, because it's such a beautiful imagery. I just absolutely love that, and I would love if I were to go back in time and could homeschool again. I would love to let my kids have access to something like that, because
Grandkids.
I do feel like they would be amplified, and I think one of the key variant would be that the computer doesn't get upset, because the parent can have a bad day, and you can get upset at a kid and they can internalize it, but it had nothing to do with them. It could be just that you got a parking ticket. It could be that you burned some food on the stove, but you're human. You got your moods, and you can't help it. It goes into your teaching.
You said you want to leave on the positive image you just did. Now you throw that
No,
out there?
but that's it's because of that that I
Infinitely
think
patient. Yeah.
infinitely patient.
Jarvis?
No judgment, because if the kid feels safe to ask any question at all, that opens up a whole world of learning that otherwise is closed to them. If they're scared of getting a bad grade, if they're scared of being laughed at, if they're scared of the teacher going, "Why didn't you learn that yesterday?" That kind
That's
of thing.
different, though. You need feedback.
You
when
do need
that
feedback.
Something's not right.
Correct.
And
But the computer can give you feedback.
well,
I just think that that's a really important variant.
Totally. It's like it can give you feedback, but it can also be infinitely patient, and it can, it can never get tired, never be cranky, never.
Yeah, exactly.
I have the deepest of empathy for parents.
so I want to make sure too. Let's do it verbally, and if you could also send the information. Can you tell people where they your website, your preferred social handles? Give us all that, and then afterwards send it to us as well, so we can put it in our show notes and make sure everybody can find you and find Daylight.
If you're interested in what we're building and you would like one for yourself or your family, you can go to daylightcomputer.com and put down a pre-order deposit, and we should be unlocking some inventory soon, so you guys can get it in not that much time. And our socials are at DaylightCo for Twitter and at DaylightCo for Instagram. And I always love when people write to me with what they want, so if it can be built in this way, or they want to collaborate, or they want to create content or a syllabus for it, or some of these dynamic books. So I'm Anjan, ANJAN, at daylightcomputer.com. If anybody wants to email me, I respond to every email. So.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing.
Awesome.
This can have a huge positive impact.
Yeah.
And 6 years. Talk about proof of work.
Yeah.
That
I
is.
put all my life savings on it too. I bootstrapped it for the first couple of years because I didn't trust VCs or investors, and frankly, I don't think they would have invested. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
We're glad you did.
proof of work, and it's going to have huge impact. So thank you for pursuing that passion and helping people out. With that,
Thank you for sharing all of your ideas and intellectual discussions. I mean, this has been so eye-opening. I'm going to go look into that whole flickering business. That makes me upset. That makes me upset. And just as a funny story to finally wrap this up, we have a stove that only has on-off also, because our dogs got on it, and when they came down, turned all the handles on, and it kind of burned off the sensors or something. So our stove is only on-off. So our medium heat is just more off than on. So I can totally.
It's tally flicker.
You guys have intuitive understanding of flicker. Oh, that's
I
totally
absolutely understand. Yeah.
All
So
right.
thank you so much for
thank
chatting
you.
with us today.
Thank you so much. Hang on. We'll stop the recording, but just if you could hang on for a second.
And something like this doesn't exist if it isn't for podcasts like yourself, right? Like if the only way people found out about stuff was CNN, like come on, it would just be Apple and Samsung forever. So
That's true.
I
Yeah.
feel like we're all on the same team,
Well-
just trying.
We don't need to seek trust when we can see proof. It is real-time consensus that aligns us to evolve. This is how, amidst uncertainty, our lives continue to grow when we uphold our own rules, we preserve our own worth, and defend our own voice, which lets the true market emerge. The strength of the design lies in each of our participation, since we are the nodes that channel our energy end to end. As we claim responsibility to uphold our own rights, we radiate the power that brings our truth into light. And when that dawn of light touches all parts of the globe, and it ripples throughout society, and it returns us the hope that becomes the power that sparks humanity to thrive, that same power that fuels the creation of the mind. And when our mind and our money are truly set free, and they transcend the limits of past boundaries, now knowing becomes owning, and ideas become wealth. What happens now? We can all push to expand the edges of our existence. It is through evolution when things are the hardest. As we head for the light, we have to push through the darkness. It is in these moments we do what we do best. We take the chaos and the darkness and use our power to create. It is in these moments when we're all in alignment, and our freedom of difference ascends us to our highest dimension.